أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه من شرور انفسنا ومن سيئات اعمالنا واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Brothers and sisters, as I asked before the beginning of each Khutbah, that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve the suffering of our brothers and sisters without this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the general sense, the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is anyone who was born after the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why we find that there's this general understanding about the grave, that it's not just the Muslims who will be asked about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it will be anyone who was born, who lived after the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, will be asked about who is this man Muhammad? What was your relationship to this man Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And so when we're asking for the relief of the suffering of specifically our brothers and sisters, this is a general dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve the suffering of all those who we know their condition or we don't know their condition. Brothers and sisters, the normalization of just extreme examples of dhulm, of oppression, is something that we just take sometimes for granted because it's become so normalized that every time we look on our TVs or we read something about what's going on, we hear, we read, we see about horrendous episodes of dhulm, of oppression. Something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbid for us as human beings. In hadith, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He forbid dhulm, oppression for Himself. And so for us not to oppress anyone, but every week, every day, we find these continuing extreme examples of the inhumanity of human beings to others. Just look what's the continuing episode that's going on in Gaza today. Consider that something that started over a year ago, going on a second year, that the world is still watching, while little babies and children are starving to death if their bodies are not blown to pieces with these mega bombs that are being provided to the Zionist state of Israel, primarily from the United States. Brothers and sisters, there's hardly a corner on the face of the earth where we can't turn and look and see the kind of quiet or the open oppression, the boom that is happening to brothers and sisters all over this earth. Brothers and sisters, make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help our brothers and sisters, whether they are Muslim or not, who have been in the path of an unprecedented firestorm. Those who keep track of these kind of things said that they, in their lives, nowhere in recorded history can they find where firestorms have been as fierce and destructive as the fires that are out in the Los Angeles area today. I know personally many Muslim brothers and Muslim sisters who live in the area, in that path, where so many houses were destroyed and the number of individuals who've been killed, we don't know that just yet. But I haven't been able to make contact with them. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects them from this. And even after, if they make it through this kind of firestorm, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve, make it easy for them to try to bring their lives and restore their lives back to health. Brothers and sisters, this month that we are in right now on the Islamic calendar is the month of Rajab. And this particular month is one of the special months on the Islamic calendar. Of course, first of all, it's one of the sacred months of the year. It's a month that you and I know that the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad was, don't fight during this month. You have all of these other months to just show your aggression. But in this particular month, unless you aggress upon it, use this month of Rajab as a prelude, as a preface, as a beginning, something that is opening a door, a path to the month of Ramadan. Use this particular month as a month begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness for anything that we know that we have done wrong and anything that we may not even be conscious that we're violating some instruction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or violating what the Prophet Muhammad has made it clear that we're to do or to not do. This is a month in which the emphasis for all of us should be, like it is every month, but this is a kind of special month that the scholars of Islam have looked at this month and said that this is a month. Whatever it is that you've done wrong, ask Allah, beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for those things that we have done knowingly or unknowingly during this particular month. Brothers and sisters, I know that storm is, most meteorologists and these weather people are saying that there should be a storm hitting our area later on today, so I'm not going to take long. And I want to just emphasize an aspect of this sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dealt with his male and female servants from the time of Adam, and how that when we look into the Quran, when we look into the prophetic history, particularly the hadith, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Adam a believing spouse. That this was someone who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his commandments just as her husband believed. So therefore, when she did and went against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had commanded, she, like her husband, would suffer the same consequences from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But oftentimes we don't recognize, we don't acknowledge that this was this first system. Like Adam, this was a believing person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave as a mate for her husband. That they made mistakes and they turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking for forgiveness, and oftentimes, as we have an overwhelming number of brothers compared to the sisters here today, how common it is for us when we look into the Quran, when we look into the prophetic history. We're looking for examples of men. It's natural to do that if you're a man. But some of those men, like myself, we have daughters, we have sisters, we have aunts, we have mothers. This deen puts equal responsibility on brothers, on men, and on women. So I just want to take just a few moments of your time and just point out one of these believing women that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran. That there are very few women by name who are mentioned in this eternal book. But one of them is an extraordinary person. And I'm not talking about Miriam Isa. I'm not talking about Mary, the mother of Isa alayhi salam. I'm talking about this sister that we know her story because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions her in the Quran. He mentions her dua in the Quran. I'm talking about the wife of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala identifies as, and just using this common language, the biggest kafir that has ever lived. Talking about Fir'aun. That this particular Pharaoh was one that was outstanding for all the wrong reasons. He's outstanding because somewhere in his mind he thinks that maybe people that I've enslaved, maybe what they're saying is there's going to be somebody who's going to come up and he's going to liberate the enslaved people, this Bani Israel. But this is the biggest kafir, biggest disbeliever that Allah points to in the Quran and designates him as such, but yet still in trying to maintain his political and just authority in the land. He didn't get it from his false beliefs, but he was afraid that there would be someone born from amongst these people who we are oppressing. And that person will overthrow what we're doing. So what did this madman do? He said, okay, first we just kill the oldest son that is born into these Jewish households. Just search them out. When they have a son, kill the oldest one. And then it went further and said, we just kill all of the boys. We don't want this person that they believe who's going to rise up and overthrow me. So just kill all of these boys. Not to get through every aspect of this person's story. But you and I know that the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designates, like I say in this common terms, the biggest kafir, the most extreme disbeliever, was married to a believing sister, with Asiya, the wife of the Pharaoh, Asiya bet Mazali. And I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but she was the wife of Pharaoh. And from the time that she heard the message that Musa alayhi salam was calling the people to, she believed, she submitted. She submitted to the message, but she kept it hidden from her disbelieving husband. Not too different. And I'm not saying this about anybody specific at all, but just saying this as a general statement. Not too different from what so many sisters say about their husbands. That they may not be like Fir'aun. They may say that they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but their behavior is so far, is so distant that I can't even show how much I believe in this deen of Allah. Now back to this story, and I'll bring it quickly to an end. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have it, this believing sister was hiding her faith from her husband. When he found out how much his wife believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did not believe in him as a Lord, as a God, what did he do? He ordered some of his henchmen. He ordered them, go get this woman, shepherd her up with her hands and her feet, her legs, and keep her like this until she goes away and says that, yes, my husband is the Lord. When we read Quran, when we read the Hadith, of the Prophet Muhammad. It tells us a story about how this believing sister married to this madman didn't flinch for a second. And what she did was to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, build for me a house in the garden in your presence. And I don't want to just be on the fringe somewhere. I want to be in a mansion. I want a house in your presence. This is her dua. After being tortured, she's chained up. And she's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just relieve me from this suffering, or build me a palace. I believe that there is this afterlife, even though my husband is crazy. He doesn't believe it. Build for me a palace in your presence. This is her dua while she's being tortured, while she has no liberty, no capacity to be able to move forward like she had been living before. And so you and I know that the torture that this crazy, mad husband put on his wife was something that she eventually succumbed to. She died from the torture that her husband inflicted upon her because she wouldn't claim, yes, you're God, so we need to worship you and follow what you say. But an interesting thing happened on her journey to paradise. After making this dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed her before she died. She's shackled up. She's in prison. But she makes this dua and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows her her palace in Jannah. And the commentators, the scholars of Islam said that that's all she needed. I've been holding on to this life. But now my Lord has shown me this palace in paradise that I've been praying for. That's all I need. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took her soul. Brothers and sisters, the stories of the sacrifices of Muslim sisters and Muslim brothers are recorded for us to look at human beings, non-prophets like ourselves, to look at human beings and just regular human beings and to achieve the highest levels of Iman, to express that because we have examples. How much sacrifice are we ready to make? Are we prepared or have we made for this cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Praises to Allah. We praise Him and seek His assistance against the evils of our minds and against the unsuccessfulness of our actions. Whosoever Allah guides, no one can lead astray. And whosoever Allah causes to err as a result of his actions, no one can lead aright. O Allah, help those who taught the religion of Muhammad and carries amongst them. O Allah, disgrace those who try to oppress the religion of Muhammad themselves, and do not make us of those. Brothers and sisters, continuing this for a moment on the necessity for us to recognize those stories who have been enshrined in the Quran and in the prophetic literature, just in the history of Islam over the centuries itself, how important it is as men, and the same thing for sisters, to don't just learn and study about those who are the same gender as you, because these women are the ones that Allah, the Prophet Muhammad says that paradise lies at their feet. And so you and I, anyone
who is a father, a husband, a grandfather, pay attention to your daughters and the development of those who are under your charge. Perhaps they will have a greater grasp on this deen than you and I. If we ignore them in some kind of chauvinistic kind of way, and just saying, well, it's about the men. These are the ones that Islam is built upon. It goes contrary to what the Prophet Muhammad said. Is the ultimate goal of this life is to achieve Jannah. And the Prophet Muhammad is saying that Jannah lies at the feet of the mothers. Then who are we to try to diminish the role of the sisters of this ummah? Some of the greatest sacrifice, some of the most inspiring stories that I've read about Muslims have been the stories historically in distant past and in more contemporary times by Muslim sisters. The sacrifices that they made, the fearless nature that they would have because of this deen. So brothers and sisters, don't be so male-centered. I'm not accusing anybody of it. It's just a cautionary thing that I'm saying. Don't be so centered on our sons, our grandsons, of the men, the uncles, the grandfathers, that we ignore that other half of humanity. We didn't know. We should know that across the planet there are more women on this earth at this time than there are men. In the United States, those who are keeping statistics are saying, and this is nothing, it's not like this is something that can't be disputed, but I've read a number of studies that say that in the Muslim countries, let's just talk about right here in the United States, that it may be 4 to 5 times as many females as there are males. And so what responsibility do we have to try to ensure to the best of our ability that these sisters are given the proper understanding and the proper guidance? They could be guiding us. I'm not saying that this goes just one way, but we have this duty and responsibility. There may be another Asi who's there, who's waiting for the opportunity, waiting for the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will try her in a way that she'll be able to show, like the Asiya of the wife of the Fir'aun, what kind of belief, what she's actually made of. Brothers and sisters, let us not disregard the history of Islam and try to look and see that my model, of course, is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. But the more that we learn about our Islamic history, not just the history, contemporary history of Muslims in the United States, the more that we learn about the history of Islam as it has spread all over the planet, we'll find that in every society there are brothers and sisters who will remind you through their sacrifices of those Sahaba of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know we can never achieve that. We can't achieve it, but we can do whatever we possibly can to get as close to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to do. In closing, the times that we're living in today are times where people are so confused about how we ought to live. Have a son. One day he's Albert, and the next day he's something else. But it's not even a male name anymore. There are people who have high profiles in society Like there is a retired NBA player who was high profile, very high profile, all-star, Hall of Famer, and all of this. And he had allowed his son to have these operations to mimic like he's a girl, like he's a girl. We're living in very challenging times. And these times will require us to look at our present conditions and analyze our present conditions. But when we look into our history, we see that the challenges that we are facing today, although may be different, or just that those before us suffered even greater or equal challenges, maybe just in different areas. So let us not think that because we're here in the United States, that whatever we do is going to set a standard for the rest of the world. Let us pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us an understanding of this deen that is useful for us in this world and in the next. Amen. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not test us beyond our capacity and give us the strength to meet the challenges that we face. Amen. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not make the enemies of Islam and the disbelieving people feel that we are the object of whatever they want to do to us. Amen. Brothers and sisters, just a few quick announcements. The first one is, please everyone be safe and careful. This North Carolina and Winston-Salem, we have a reputation of not getting a lot of snow. And it's very seldom that you can get 2 days before snow and the streets are being just loaded with salt all over the place. And so I don't know if this because they really feel we're going to get a heavy snow and they need all this on the roads or not. But the predictions are we're going to get some heavy snow. And one of our dear brothers, Brother Abdullah Nelson, has agreed that for a very nominal fee, if you have that ice and snow at your house, you can't get out of your driveway, can't walk down the sidewalk, anything like that. And trust me, he has the professional equipment to do what he's saying that he will do. So you can just contact him and utilize his offer. And part of that nominal amount that he is charging to do this, a substantial portion of that will be donated to the mosque for mosque operations. And so I point this out, so to encourage myself and others to think about the mosque and ways in which we can strengthen the mosque, whether it's through our labor and doing and helping or picking up paper or whatever it is. But we should feel ownership of the mosque. And we do everything we can to try to make people, everybody who comes here feel comfortable and welcome. This is your mosque. So let's try to act like it's our mosque and do everything that we can to help improve whatever it is that we have here already. Because it's love.